Is it working? Yeah, okay. As always, we hope that the information that we provide you in our programs helps inform future actions as we all work together to make Alexandria a better place to live, work, shop, and play. We're working right now on the programs for the coming season, which starts in September. Please, there are some slips of paper on your table that says 2016-2017 program ideas. Please write your ideas and turn them in to Sherry as you leave so that we can take into consideration when we set the program the kind of programs that you believe we should be covering. And as always, we couldn't do this without the support of our sponsors for this season.
I did.
As usual, we start with our hosts, the Hermitage of Northern Virginia, who provides this wonderful room. If any of our sponsors are in the room, wave so we can thank you personally. The Alexandria Chamber of Commerce, Onion with State Farm Insurance. There you go. Barbara Anderson of Life and Estate Planning Law Center. David Speck of Speck Cauldron Investment Group, Wells Fargo Advisors. Donna and Tobin James of Honest Air Heating and Air Conditioning. Thank you. I don't want to interrupt Gant getting his dessert, but Gant Redmond of Redmond, Payton, and Braswell LLP.
There's dessert. I should have got some coffee.
Willem Pollock and Charlotte Hall of Potomac River Boat Company. Katie Gilchrist of Maid Brigade, and Jerry Vernon, the Alexandria Gazette. And as always, with us is our sponsor, Derek Limas of Municipal Media Services, LLC. He and Rodney Clark record us for replay on Comcast Channel 70 weekly on Monday and Saturday nights at 9 and Wednesday mornings at 10. This program will begin the beginning of May. You can also see some of our past programs because he started now posting them on YouTube. So if you type in Agenda Alexandria YouTube in your browser, it should pop up and you can select several of our recent programs and a couple of our older programs. We also announced that last month we were informed by the city that the funds for recording and showing our programs are not included in the upcoming budget.
Uh-oh.
So we are exploring other possibilities and appreciate any suggestions that you might give us about how we can continue what we think is an important and valuable addition and service to Alexandria. We're pretty sure we'll be able to find a solution. We're just not sure quite yet what it is. Are there any currently elected officials in the room? I don't see anybody. If any of you are members or serving on boards, commissions, or task force, and you have written materials that will help explain what you're doing, put them on the resource table, which is over there by Sherry, or just give them to Sherry, and she'll put them on the welcome table. You can also give them to anyone who's wearing name badges with red ribbons. Those are the agenda board members, and I'd like them to stand right now and be recognized as the important part of this organization that they are. Thank you so much. It's that time of year. There are membership forms at the welcome table. If you haven't renewed your own membership, please do so or do it soon. If you're not yet a member, we have this special deal. Wait, there's more. If you join now, you can attend next month's program as a member at the member price. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, we hope you'll join before September. Speaking of this season, next month we'll be interviewing an Agenda Alexandria member. He's also run for president. I mean, that's the second most important thing about him. He's an Agenda Alexandria member. We're going to be talking with Jim Gilmore about what goes into making a monumental decision to decide to run for president, and to give us some insights about what it's like to be on the national campaign trail. This is a unique opportunity to get the inside story and find out. I hope you'll join us on May 23rd. It's also our annual meeting where we'll be electing a new board of directors. If you have specific questions that you'd like to ask Governor Gilmore, you can write those on a piece of paper as well and make sure that a board member has those, and we'll give them to the sponsors, not the sponsors, but the program co-chairs. Now to tonight's program. It was organized by Janet Barnett, Frank Fannin, and Bruce Johnson. It focuses on an especially important topic as we look at community security. Recent events have been frightening reminders of how vulnerable cities have become to attack. I hope you'll join us as we look at how Alexandria has prepared. For tonight's presentation, we're going to have a slightly different way of handling questions. We still want you to use the colored pieces of paper to write down your questions. We still hope you'll write legibly so that they can be read. And we also can still no longer take questions from the floor because they can't be heard by everyone in the audience and they aren't picked up by the television cameras. So if we're ready to get started, Bruce, will you introduce our panel?
Thank you, Pam. My name is Bruce Johnson, and tonight we'll have a roundtable discussion, a little bit different format. We live next door to the capital of the United States, and it is a magnet for many people who come here for many reasons. Unfortunately, that magnetism can attract people who want to do great good, but also some people who want to do great harm. Indeed, at least since 9/11, such a scenario is never far from our consciousness. Tonight, we'll have three Alexandrians help us look at how we plan to avoid or minimize the harm caused by such an incident. What we might be called upon to do in the midst of the incident itself, and how we might cope with the aftermath. And now our format's a moderated discussion format supplemented by your written questions, and so we'll be talking about this subject with three informed and knowledgeable people. Deputy Chief of Police David Huckler, on my immediate right, has served with our police department for 24 years. He now oversees the Investigations Bureau and works with other local and national enforcement organizations to assess and mitigate these types of threats. He has graduated from the FBI National Academy and holds a Bachelor of Science in Law Enforcement and a Master of Public Administration from George Mason. Next over is Jonathan Toymer, who's worked with the Alexandria Department of Community and Human Services for 18 years. He's a licensed clinical social worker who has worked closely with the police department as a representative on the department's critical incident stress management team and the hostage negotiating team, as well as the sheriff's department's crisis negotiation team. At the other end of the table is Michael Pope, an award-winning author and journalist who lives in Alexandria, and he has reported for NPR, the Alexandria Gazette Packet, the New York Daily News, and the Tallahassee Democrat. He's currently a reporter for Virginia Public Radio. A native of Moultrie, Georgia, he was raised in Durham, North Carolina, and he attended college and graduate school at Florida State University. He's the author of 4 books, and he wants you to know that they're all for sale here tonight after the panel discussion. We're going to organize this discussion on a chronological basis, before, during, and after an incident. And our intention and our hope is that the discussion might give us some reassurance that there are things we can do to minimize the risk of them happening, deal with them as they unfold to minimize their consequences, and recover from them as quickly as possible emotionally. So let me start with the preparations before the incident. So I'll start with Chief Huckler first. Chief, can you tell us something about how the Alexandria Police Fire Department, sorry.
That's okay, we work closely with the fire department. They're part of our preparation.
How you all work with the FBI and other local law enforcement agencies in the region to monitor possible threats.
Thank you, and thank you for having us here tonight for this very important discussion. You know, police work is all about assessing risk, responding to critical incidents, and making sure we're prepared for that. And I think everyone knows one of the the timeline in allowing us to further our preparations was 9/11. After 9/11, I think everybody realized the need to collaborate and coordinate our resources, our communication, and our intelligence gathering abilities. So we work very closely with the FBI. We have a detective assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and essentially that person's embedded with the FBI. So we get real-time information from our federal partners on intelligence of any threats that are growing, concerning threats, threats that are imminent or far off, and it allows us to prepare in a way, in a responsible way, because the preparation for the type of attacks we can expect are time-consuming, staff-intensive. They require a lot of equipment. So we have a very good relationship with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and many of our other federal partners. You mentioned the fire department. The fire department is obviously going to be on the front lines of anything the police department's doing. They're first responders, and actually right now there's in the region a growing trend of the integrating of fire resources and police resources. They're calling it Rescue Task Force across the region. What this enables is that when there's a crisis, when there's a critical incident, the fire department and the police department can integrate together so that it's not just about stopping the threat. While the police are moving and trying to mitigate the threat or stop the threat, the fire department, the EMS personnel can also start their rescue operations. In years past, that wasn't the case. We can go back to Columbine, which is a pivotal point in law enforcement training and experience. In Columbine, officers set a perimeter, waited for special operations teams or SWAT teams to come arrive before they went in and tried to go after the threat. Well, we learned from that. You no longer can wait. So we're always training, we're always evolving, and through that evolution, we've learned not only can the police not wait to try and go in and minimize the threat, but now our fire and EMS partners also realize that, and they work closely with us so they can continue to save lives. And through all these departments, the coordination in the National Capital Region, even though we live in this area and it is obviously one of the high-risk areas in terms of a target for possible terrorist activity, the one thing I can tell you is in the National Capital Region, you have some of the most professional organizations working on these issues, whether it's our federal partners, state partners, or local partners. There's a lot of coordination and communication. We work with the Council of Governments. There's coordination of a number of agencies and committees, Chief of Police Committee, Fire Committees, Intelligence Committee, Investigative Committees. And all these committees are working towards the singular goal of ensuring we have the resources in this area to respond to any type of threat, whether it's terrorist, whether it's a natural disaster. So we're constantly training, evaluating our equipment, and through this effort, there's also funds available through the Urban Area Security Initiative. And through that, we sometimes can recover monies that are expended or get monies from the federal government to help us prepare for these type of threats.
These threats can vary in their probability of occurring as well as the magnitude of their consequences. Do you have any type of threat that keeps you up at night more often than others?
There's a lot that keeps me up at night, but that's because we get paid to worry about that, and we get paid to think about these things. A lot of what we do is we have to assess risk. What is most likely going to occur? Our federal partners do the same. Our military partners do it constantly. The one thing we have an advantage over is that in the United States, we're able to see what's happening around the world. And through that observation and through the intelligence collection, we can start assessing what the risk here at home is going to be and start preparing for it. Most of you have already seen much of what I'm going to say in the news. The things that we can't control, the lone wolf, coordinated attacks, these are things that are worrisome because they're hard to vet out. And so if you have somebody acting independently, we've seen this across the country, whether it's domestic related or foreign related, these are issues that are very concerning because we see it all too often in the United States where a single person can cause extreme damage in a very short period of time. These are the types of events that are very hard to prevent. And a lot of what we want to try and do in our profession is prevent. We train very often on how to respond to critical incidents, how we respond to an active violence incident. But our primary goal is to prevent those from ever occurring. And to your earlier question, the coordination and collaboration with our federal partners is what allows us to prevent these acts from ever occurring. But with that being said, we know these events will occur. We know people are going to operate independent of any organization, either because they're mentally ill or because they have an axe to grind or they're just a criminal element that wants to cause harm. We know they're going to occur, so we have to prepare not only to prevent these type of incidents, we also have to prepare to intervene on those type of incidents.
There used to be a color coding analysis of the threat levels, and it's sort of fallen into disuse. But the problem comes up is when you feel the risk is ratcheting up, is what can you share and how can you share it with the public so they can be prepared if something is in fact going to happen. I remember my time with the city. It was the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and we were all on pins and needles for that. But there were some things that could be said and some things that couldn't be said at the time. So how do you distinguish what you can say and not say to the public?
Well, I think we're always going to tell the public when there's something that's going to occur or occurring that puts them in immediate danger. You talk about the threat matrix or the color coding. The one reason that didn't work is because law enforcement really operates in a hypervigilant state. So they had the color coding. That doesn't really change our posture on things. During that time period after 9/11, there were times when we put more resources out. We may have covered some critical infrastructure with more people, more assets, but essentially what we learned was we're always operating in a state of hypervigilance. We're always out there looking and trying to determine where the threats are. So that's why that color coding didn't work well for us. As far as with the public, I don't think the color coding was that effective either, because really what we have learned is we can't do it by ourselves. Police, law enforcement in general, it really is incumbent upon the public to assist us in trying to identify those things that are suspicious, those things that will allow us to investigate and intervene before an incident occurs. So I think the best we can do is let people know if there is something imminent. I think it helps if we can let people know if we're looking for something specific. But ultimately it comes down to everyone needs to have a type of awareness, a situational awareness, be cognizant of their community and what's happening within their community, and call us when they see something that's out of the ordinary or suspicious. The term "see something, say something." I think that was coined because of terrorism, but in essence, that's a great crime prevention strategy. We expect, especially here in Alexandria, and we have very good tools for citizens to report all kinds of stuff, broken lights, broken sidewalks, and things like that. Take that to the next level. We want to keep our community secure. It can be at the most minimal level of reporting a pothole, but when it comes to law enforcement, we need the eyes and ears of the community to report suspicious activity. So on our part, we need to provide information to the community to make you aware, whether it's provide training or provide information that lets you know how you can assist us, how you can report information. But again, our primary goal is going to be for the safety of the community, and we will put out information that should help you become aware of what's happening in your community so you can take steps to protect yourself. There's always a great balance. There's always a great balance, as you just alluded to. What can't we tell you? Well, oftentimes where we draw the line is when it becomes an investigative material fact. There are oftentimes we won't release information to the public because it will hinder our ability to further an investigation and ultimately intervene into something before it occurs. If we released everything all the time, we would not be able to solve cases. We would not be able to arrest people before they commit a criminal act. And so the same thing, whether it's types of crimes, theft, homicides, or terrorist activities, we have to balance notifying the community about information with investigative material fact. We don't want to hinder our ability to either arrest or reduce the possibility of a critical incident occurring.
Okay, I'm going to move to Michael. And a few things he might have said you may want to follow up on, but before we begin on that, let me ask how media organizations prepare to cover these types of stories, if they do, and how do they, or is it just a sort of a reaction, all hands on deck when something happens?
So in preparation for being asked that question, I actually approached several people in this industry today about this and got a variety of perspectives of people that work in different media organizations, different kind of media organizations. And, they all had kind of a similar response is, of course we prepare. We would be sort of foolish not to prepare. In fact, I think the chief was talking about like their preparations. They spend a lot of time and effort preparing for things, having contingencies. And in a media organization, you can spend a lot of time and effort and money planning on stuff, but then, there's a saying in the Pentagon, something to the effect of like, upon first contact, your plan goes out the window, right? I think there was a famous boxer who said, you thought you had a plan until you got punched in the face. Then you no longer have a plan. So in a media organization, you can have a plan that says, here's our lead reporter, and here's the technology we're going to use, and this is how we're going to sort of work through this. Well, then the day arrives, and the reporter that is on your plan is in the hospital delivering a child, and the technology you thought you were going to use doesn't work because it relied on your iPhone. And I don't know if you've ever been in a room with 1,000 people that are trying to use their iPhones at the same time, but they don't work, right? I mean, you can go to all kinds of mass events, and I've been to many events like this, where you think, you can't use Twitter because you're in a room with 1,000 other people who are trying to use Twitter. It just doesn't work. So on one hand, it's really important to think about things and plan, and then on the other hand, you really have to respond to events as they come to you because your plan is probably not going to work anyway. So one person I asked this question to about preparation raised something which I had never thought about, which is, what if there's a scenario, and in fact, I think there's a movie that's premised on this that's coming out now. What if there's a scenario where you've got somebody who demands to go on live television or live broadcast right then, or else they're going to kill somebody or do something terrible? Really would behoove this is really more for broadcast journalism. It would really behoove a sort of broadcast operation to think through that and decide, well, are they going to put the person on the air? Are they not going to put the person on the air? And so actually the person that said this to me, I turned it around on him and I said, okay, well, assume that you're the director at this particular broadcast association. Would you do that? And he said, well, I don't have the training to make that call. I mean, that's something that, you would really need someone who has training in hostage negotiations, which we actually have someone on the panel that does that. And so this person I asked the question to said, this is really something that media organizations should put some time and thought into, like how they respond to certain kinds of situations. So the other response I got on this question, which I thought was really fascinating, is that it's really important for media organizations to have somebody in their sphere that has some kind of relationship with local law enforcement. Because you would be surprised at how many national big media organizations have no relationships with people in their local law enforcement community. They only have relationships with the FBI or the CIA or, Congress, that sort of thing. But then if you think back to 9/11 here at the Pentagon, who were the first responders there? The Arlington Fire Department was the first responders. So there's another way of looking at that in terms of preparation. Having people in the media organization that have some kind of personal relationship with the local law enforcement community. So that's one thing. On that issue, having relationships with people in the local law enforcement community, one issue that came up with one person I talked to today, he raised the issue of the Boston Marathon bombing. So you may remember that CNN infamously reported that there had been an arrest in the Boston Marathon case, when in fact there had been no arrest at that point. It was John King of CNN, had egg all over his face. CNN really took a black eye on this one. And apparently what happened is that there had been some action around the local courthouse. And as it turns out, there was some sort of hoax bomb scare at the courthouse. So there was all this police activity right around the courthouse. And, people were saying to CNN, hey, we think there might be some people, being arrested and taken to the courthouse. And then they actually got confirmation. A high-ranking city official in Boston actually confirmed this to CNN that, yeah, there had been an arrest. So here goes John King on the air talking about that when there had been no arrest. Well, so the person that raised this to me said, well, if CNN had some sort of relationship with the local law enforcement community in Boston, they could have called up the local Boston people, because this particular person who was raising this issue to me was one of the people that shot down the CNN story. Like they had the kind of relationships with people there that said something to the effect of I think the high-ranking police person in Boston actually got on their local radio, the police radio, and said, do not stand down. We have not made an arrest. So because they didn't want the police responders to sort of back off, they wanted, them to be sort of full bore. And if they were watching CNN and thought, well, there's been arrests, we can sort of stand down now, they were really interested in making sure that the police sort of were still going forward with what they needed to do. So the other sort of major, in recent years, sort of major egg-on-your-face moment is the shooting of Gabby Giffords, which you may remember there was lots of reporting that she had died, when in fact she had not died. In fact, NPR reported that she had died. And, you may know NPR has a reputation of not necessarily being first to a story, right? So it was out of character for NPR to report something like that, because typically their way of looking at the world is, if we're not really sure, we'll just wait for the next newscast. And if WTOP gets it first, that's fine. We'd rather sort of get it right and get it on our timetable, not on the sort of breaking news timetable. But what happened there, and I was actually speaking to someone at NPR about this today, is they got a call from their local NPR reporter, their sort of local affiliate reporter, 10 minutes before the newscast, saying, Gabby Giffords is dead. I've got it on confirmation. And so the NPR people then called Capitol Hill, and the Capitol Hill source said, yeah, I also heard Gabby Giffords had died. So, from their perspective, they had the reporter saying it. They had confirmation on Capitol Hill. This is 10 minutes before the newscast. They decided to go with it. And then immediately afterwards, right after the newscast, they learned that that was not in fact the case. This is all a manner of saying part of preparation is also kind of knowing what you should do and what you should not do, and sometimes those are lessons that are learned the hard way.
Is there, you say, getting to know or have contacts in local law enforcement, is there any more systematic way that the news organizations can learn how, or do they already do this, learn how police, fire, emergency organizations respond, and the mechanisms they use for communicating information out? I'm thinking in particular of the National Incident Command System approach, which has somebody who handles is maybe the wrong term, excuse me, but who deals with the press. And as the incident...
Handles, ignores.
Yeah, as the incident is unfolding, though, there are certain, you mentioned listening in on the radio in Boston, and they could hear that they're saying, don't stand down, don't stand down. So I guess my question is, somebody familiar with local law enforcement procedures and processes might be able to know how to communicate better, but do the press study that in any systematic way?
Does the press do anything in a systematic way? I think is the real question. So I'm not really sure the best way to answer that. I mean, I think the person that was giving me that particular perspective that I was sort of trying to craft what he told me to give to you, I think his point was developing sources, like human sources, right? Okay. So that's not necessarily a systematic study of processes in a city government or
somebody you can call and,
yes,
and
actual
get a straight
human
answer.
Intelligence, yeah. Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As we're thinking about this topic, is there any part of the press, print, broadcast, newspapers, magazines, or particular news organizations that you think provide the best type of coverage in assessing threats before they happen? Or places you would go to read about what's going on in the security world and, processing the threats ISIS might pose to the United States or Al Qaeda or domestic hate organization, organizations on the lists, if you would.
So the answer to that is yes. There is a sort of very vibrant niche publication of different kinds of magazines, websites, news sources that specialize in this. I spent some time looking at them today. The CTC Sentinel, you guys heard of the Combating Terrorism Center? It's located at West Point. They have a magazine called The Sentinel. The lead story in the most recent Sentinel is it reveals some internal documents from the Islamic State showing that they're actually weakening. This is not light reading, I have to admit. I spent some time looking at this today. This is pretty heavy stuff. So there's also something called the Long War Journal. This is like, people sometimes in the old days, people talked about World War III. We no longer talk about World War III anymore. Now we talk about the Long War. So this is the Long War Journal. It's published by something called the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Their recent issue has a story about the first Islamic State attack in Somalia and the potential for the collapse of the government of Somalia. Again, not light reading here. The Daily Beast actually has a great reputation in this sort of stuff. There's also something called the Site Intelligence Group, and you actually have to subscribe to get this stuff. However, if you follow them on Twitter, you can get the headline and the first line of the story, which tells you all kinds of interesting stuff about, it's usually about people claiming responsibility for killing this person or blowing this building up. And that actually is a very well-respected source.
Bruce, if I could just add.
Go ahead, David.
Just to kind of talk about the press and the relationship with law enforcement, a lot of intelligence gathering is done by open source reporting. So when Bruce asked about what we can inform the public about, well, oftentimes it's the public or the press that's informing us. A lot of information that's put through our fusion centers and being disseminated by intelligence organizations and being put out to the police is all open source material by investigative reporters that are writing some really good material and insights into the threats that might be occurring. So, there is this relationship, and I do think the press plays a part in keeping the community informed. But it's also a good tool for us to stay informed and also, recognize what threats are out there.
Are there any evacuation plans in place for the city if something should happen, some sort of chemical, biological release, radiation? Or is it all stay in place, hunker down?
For me? You want to talk about that? It's a great question. It's not one or the other. It's both. Depending on the situation, your best option may be to stay in place. In other instances, your best option may be able to leave the area where the threat's occurring. As far as evacuation plans, the NCR does have coordinated plans in order to move a large amount of people away from the area, whatever area that may be. However, as you can imagine, in this area, that's a very difficult prospect. And in my career, I can tell you we've been having this discussion, for the past 10, 12, 14 years, because the plans are always evolving because we learn from different incidents. I can give you a great example, and many of you may remember this. Anybody recall when the Woodrow Wilson Bridge was shut down? And not just recently. I know it was shut down this week, but the bridge was shut down for a number of hours, and it created chaos within the National Capital Region. It was gridlock. 9/11 was another great example. It was absolute gridlock around the region. So when we talk about evacuation plans, there are plans and able to move a large amount of people to different areas, but it's a very difficult prospect in an urban area in a national capital region such as ours. But I guess to answer your question, yes, there's a number of plans in place that the public would be informed about depending on the type of threat that evolves.
I appreciate the questions coming in from the audience. Some of them I'm going to hold on to, and when we get to those questions a little bit later or closer to that point, we'll add them in. So don't be discouraged. Keep your questions coming up. One more for Michael, and then we'll go to Jonathan. One of the difficulties dealing with this issue is what law enforcement authorities know and what they are doing or plan to do sometimes must remain closely held or secret. But do you have any particular thoughts about what law enforcement authorities should share about their intelligence and preparations before an incident?
So many people in this room have probably heard me talk ad nauseum about lack of information being available to the press. In fact, I've spoken many times to people at the police department about the availability of documents. You know, one of the first jobs I had in journalism when I lived in Tallahassee was driving to the police department every day to pick up the stack of police reports and then taking them to the newspaper and then sort of writing them out for our daily crime log. So when I moved to Alexandria, I said, "Where do I pick up the police reports?" And they said, "You can't have them." And I said, "What do you mean I can't have them?" And then I realized that, sure enough, they have the legal authority to withhold them. And I said, "Well, why don't you just give them to me anyway?" Because I had them in Tallahassee. And, well, no, we don't want to do that. In my own personal opinion, the police agency, this is not about Alexandria, just police agencies in Virginia, tend to withhold things that are available in many other states, and they don't hurt crime, and they don't hurt going after criminals in Florida. And I don't really see a good argument for withholding. We're talking about basic incident reports. You know, like if there's a burglary on your block, you know, being able to get the police report written by the responding officer. So there's that.
I feel like this is a big preposition you're getting to.
No, actually, that was the tangent. The actual better response to your that was my own personal sort of response to the question. In terms of terrorism, this is actually an important point. You may remember there was the situation in Oregon where there was this community college student that went and on a rampage, killed 10 people, and you had the local sheriff there being very hostile to the media. I don't know if you guys remember this, but he refused to confirm the number of dead people, and then he refused to give the name of the individual that had been identified, and like they knew that the name was Chris Mercer. So they knew the guy's name was Chris Mercer. I mean, they had this confirmed, but they wouldn't say the sheriff wouldn't say his name, and then it became this big debate about, you know, saying the name of the mass murderer in this case. You know, should you say his name on television? And then it became a really interesting debate about sort of the different mediums. Like people on television would say, well, some people on some television stations would say, we shouldn't say the person's name on broadcast media. We should leave that to the people in print, which I thought was a very strange distinction. Like, why would print have a name, but you wouldn't say the name on broadcast? I mean, I can sort of see the arguments there, but I think they're strained. So that's sort of basic stuff, confirming the number of people who have been killed when they know the number of people that have been killed. But this particular sheriff was sort of not willing to do that in a public setting, and the name of the individual responsible.
But what about before an incident happens and there's some information, would you agree or not agree that there might be some information that the law enforcement authorities should withhold for public safety's sake? Or should it all just come out?
Well, I, as you might imagine, lean strongly on the sharing information. Although, I can see the argument that would say if you share a certain kind of information that people might overreact to it, you don't necessarily know something is going to happen. I think you mentioned, Bruce, the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 and things that were going on in the city. My ears sort of perked up when you said that, because I'm thinking, what was going on in the city? I wasn't aware of this. But let's say had the city of Alexandria shared what it thought might happen on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, that could have caused some sort of panic and behavior that might have been counterproductive, especially considering that nothing, to my knowledge, happened on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. So, in retrospect, now we would say, of course, you shouldn't have shared that information because it would have done nothing but negative things, right? However, I would argue, I would make the case in the public interest that it would be important to share what you know so that the public has a sense of what's going on. That's not a clear answer to what you're saying, but there are two ways of looking at that.
Sure. Jonathan, you've been patient here. One of the things that is the see something, say something. And at times that can lead to, well, one, a lot of false positives, a lot of chasing things that might not be important. But that's a different sort of a problem. But others are the ethnic stereotype. Somebody sees the person who speaks Arabic or looks dark and swarthy, and so they're suspicious on the airplane. But there may be some real foundation underneath the fear as well. So how are people supposed to process this instruction of see something, say something? When do they make a judgment that they should actually call the police? Or I'm not asking you to say, always do it this way or always do it that way, but from a psychological perspective, how do you process an instruction like that?
Thank you, and I'll do my best to speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear me. I do tend to speak softly. I think see something, say something is, this is, in these days and time, I think this is a good policy to take just generally. I think it always was, though, to look out for our neighbors, to look out for people we might be concerned about in our neighborhood even. We were talking before this, before we started this evening about, if there's someone you're concerned about in your neighborhood, speak up, say something, ask, call the police or call the Alexandria Mental Health Center or call the geriatric team, if there's an older person who you're worried about. So, I think that any kind of concern we have, obviously we're not trying to profile people or, make any calls on someone just based on the way they look or something like that. I don't think that helps us at all. But I do think that you leave the judgment up to the person you report it to. If you're reporting something to the police, it's their responsibility to determine if it's something worth looking into or investigating it and determining how far they need to go. I think it's a reasonable thing to ask of citizens to look out for each other.
Chief Huckler, should the something phrase in that expression be defined anymore? In other words, it's the question I got, which I think is a good one, is if you see something, say something, well, what does something mean? What is it that you're seeing, and then what should you be saying?
See, something cannot be defined by me here tonight. Something is what you define in your community as what you see as normal. And so when you're in let's bring it down to your community. You're here in this building, if you live in this building, or if you live in this community, you start to see on a regular basis the comings and goings of people, vehicles, normal day-to-day things that on its own, you probably don't even know it as you're going to your car, or as you're shopping up at Brad Lee, or is it, if you're going down into Old Town. There's normalcy to your everyday decisions. And so, to me, when we put out see something, say something, we want you to report things that seem out of place, not normal, suspicious. And that could be any number of things to you. The comments about, are we worried about, I guess, profiling, racial, ethnic profiling? It's difficult to sit here and tell you because those type of things are intrinsic. Everybody has their own perceptions of people or their own experiences. But here's the key, what I want to tell you. You need to report it if you deem it suspicious for any reason. You have a very well-trained, professional police department, and the worst thing that's going to happen is we may engage somebody in a consensual conversation. Let us determine if behaviors are suspicious. Police officers are not trained to profile on race and ethnicity. We profile on behaviors of people. And so you all do it on an everyday basis. You may just not call it what we're trained to call it. When you guys go out and you see somebody acting suspiciously, the reason you know they're acting suspiciously is because you know what normal behavior is. And Jonathan can probably speak to this more so. There are certain expectations from citizens within the community. Sometimes you may become suspicious because those activities of an individual are outside the norm. Well, you know what we may determine? It may be a cultural difference. It may be, some type of differences in where people come from across the country or across the world. But your police department can figure that out in a non-intrusive manner, protecting and adhering to a person's civil rights. And so it's a very difficult question because when we look at what occurred out west and the couple that committed acts of violence out there, what we learned in the aftermath of that is the community they were living in, neighbors saw suspicious behavior but didn't report it because they didn't want to be deemed a bad neighbor or stereotyping or any type of negative connotation to them. And we're in a day and age now where you can't let that interfere with reporting suspicious behavior. And so see something, say something, you guys will define it. But the best I can tell you is you guys know your community and you know when something's out of place. And so we're just asking that you report that.
Thank you. Jonathan, let me follow that up with a question that's, so if we're in a world where we're seeing some things and saying some things, can we become too preoccupied with these types of threats? Can our life become too fearful? Should we lean toward ignoring threats, or might we be focusing too much on them? How do we strike the right sort of balance between that in our daily existence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think balance is an important thing to strive for. Certainly, I don't think, as Deputy Chief Huckler was saying, you don't want to ignore things. You want to certainly always be, I don't want to say vigilant necessarily. I think vigilance can wear on a person, and that can cause some problems. But we want to be aware, and that's again a part of being a good citizen nowadays, particularly in the last 15 or 16 years. I think that's come to the forefront. But yeah, it can become too much. Certainly we know people, and maybe we've even had experiences when things happening, when we're seeing things in the press, when there's events where we're worrying about it, or maybe we know people who are worrying about it. Maybe we think it's too much. They're preoccupied with it, as you said. Anytime something like that is happening where it's interfering with a person's life and their family and their relationships, there's a problem, right? And many of these incidents that we're talking about, or these issues we're talking about, are fairly low probability incidents, right? You know, if we wanted to worry about something every day, we could worry about our commute to work in the Beltway, and that would be probably a much more probable, event that something terrible could happen. To be honest with you, but we tend to have normalized that risk somehow, and we just kind of go with it and hope for the best when we leave the house. But yeah, I would say that anytime something starts interfering with life, when you're getting feedback from family or other people that it seems like too much, that's when it's time to look for some help and maybe talk with somebody.
Should we watch all those TV shows that are premised on like 24, or should we avoid them?
Again, in moderation, I think. Don't overdo it. As with anything, I think with the press coverage, after something happens, there's a sort of a tipping point. At some point, you have enough information about the event, you kind of know what's going on, and then maybe to continue watching, or to continue watching a plane hit a building over and over may not be helpful in your need to have an understanding of what's going on.
Michael?
Can I piggyback on that, actually? So one of the people that I talked to today works at CNN, and I asked him about, so in the event of something's going on, like what should you read, what should you watch, should you listen to? And he said, if you're not directly involved in it, in other words, if you're not in the immediate area, what you should do is do something else for an hour and then come back to it. Because the first hour that you're going to see on CNN is people sort of killing time, essentially, right? I mean, sort of saying the same thing over and over again. You just said, how many times can you see the same footage of the same plane hitting the same building? I mean, you're not, after a while, it's, in the business, they call it wallpaper. You're not really learning anything from it. You're just seeing it over and over again. And like, there's got to be an emotional, psychological weight to that.
I think so, yes. I think, at some point, there's the trauma of it, and then there may be some re-traumatization, or, so it's something you want to moderate, and you want to, just get as much information as you need to understand what's happening, and then I would maybe check in periodically is probably what I would recommend to somebody.
Okay. I'm going to move to during the incident here, and in a few of our responses and comments, we've jumped into that, so we may come back to those points. But first, for Chief Huckler, recently on 60 Minutes, D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier has said that in an active shooter situation, which I'll let you explain a little bit for us, but that's a particular type of event, your options are run, hide, or fight. I always say, that's Chief Lanier, if you can get out, getting out's your first option, your best option. If you're in a position to try and take the gunman down, to take the gunman out, it's the best option for saving lives before police can get there. Do you recommend we run, hide, or fight, and in what order?
Yes, and in that order.
And in that order. What led Chief Lanier to come up with this guidance?
Again, we learn from experience. Chief Lanier's comments are spot on. And if you just Google run, hide, fight, or Bing it, I'm not partial. So if you look that up, you're going to see a lot of information, and you're going to see a very good video. I believe it was developed by either Department of Justice, Homeland Security developed it, and it really is the culmination of years of preparing for active violence. It started with active shooter. A lot of people call it active shooter. We've transitioned a little bit. It's active violence because violence can take many forms, whether it's a knife or a gun. So when we train, we're training for active violence incidents. So what do we expect of the community when they're subjected to this type of critical incident? I think early on thinking was to shelter in place, barricade the door, hide in the closet. And I think what we started to see as, unfortunately, we gained experience in these type of incidents is essentially what we're telling you is to just go and be defenseless and be at somebody else's mercy. So the run, hide, fight is the culmination of if you don't have to be in that area, run. And that's your best option. The further you can get away from violence, obviously the safer and the better off you're going to be. hide. If you don't have the opportunity to hide, run, you need to hide. Find a place, secure the door, hide somewhere, become as small as you can, barricade the door, but have a plan. You have to have a plan. So the last part of that is, if you can't run and your hiding spot isn't that great, or maybe the suspect is now coming to where you're located or breaking through that door, have a plan to fight, because you don't want to just sit there, stand there, and become a victim. And so oftentimes when there's resistance to that suspect, the violence will stop. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a tall task to ask of anyone, to try and stop somebody that's committed to an act of violence. But the other option is to just stand there and be subjected to violence. And so it's a culmination of a lot of experience, and it's a culmination and information. We're talking about information we can give to the public. This is probably one of the best messages that's getting out there right now, is giving an expectation, because good, bad, or indifferent, oftentimes when law enforcement speaks, public safety, emergency managers, I think the community is, they respect our position, our training, our subject matter expertise. So we hope that the information we're providing you is going to save your life. And so when we talk about run, hide, fight, it's giving you options. And in any type of plan, as Mr. Pope alluded to, you got to have option, because your first plan is probably going to go out the window as soon as a crisis kicks off. So you need to have a secondary plan, and a third, and a fourth. And so you want to do everything you can to protect yourself. So I encourage all of you to just look up Run, Hide, Fight. I think it's a 5-minute video, and it really explains what you as a citizen, as a civilian, as somebody in a workplace, somebody in a public place, what you can do to help save lives.
Jonathan, you're trained in hostage negotiations. If one of us were a hostage, what would you advise us to do?
Well, I would say, I was going to mention the run, hide, and fight.
But you've run and you've hid
we
and
did
you
all
fought,
that, right?
and now you're
because
a hostage.
there's a good chance, that something, that this kind of incident may be as a result of something that might look like an act of violence thing in the beginning. So that would be a good place to start. If you are a hostage, I would say a few things. For one thing, I wouldn't recommend, once the police make contact, or law enforcement make contact with the person, I know and Deputy Chief, you can help me out here, but I know that we wouldn't recommend that a person try to negotiate with the hostage taker themselves. That we would recommend that a person, there's a few things I would say to them. One thing, kind of observe what's going on, be able to be helpful for intelligence gathering. Understand that the hostage negotiation and the tactical people who are going to be responding are going to need a lot of information, and that, if you have an opportunity to get out or something like that, the information that you can provide can be very, very helpful. Even the layout of the room or things like that. And I'm not going to talk about tactical things. Deputy Chief can do that. But that sort of thing, to understand how you can be helpful, and also to know a little bit about hostage negotiation and the sort of science or psychology to it. What they're trying to do is isolate the person, and basically just have that person who's the hostage taker communicating with one person who's the negotiator, and that negotiator is trying to sort of tip the balance with this person from a very high emotional state that the person's likely in as they're being violent and very upset, and the negotiator is trying to bring it down using a lot of active listening techniques to sort of hear the person out, get the emotion out of it, get the rational mind working and thinking, and in that way working toward a resolution that's less emotional, less dangerous, more thoughtful, and so just knowing, if you were ever in a situation, this is what the police are attempting to do. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get the person to calm down. So to the extent as a victim that you can kind of bear with it, look out after the other people that are there, if you can, I suppose, and take in as much information as you can.
Can I
Go
piggyback
ahead.
on this? So I'm wondering what you would say to the media organization that's put in this sort of quandary about, like, let's say, for the sake of argument, it's News Channel 8, and like they're in their studio in Roslyn, and they've got the hostage taker is there in the building and says, put me on live television now, or else I'm going to kill this person or whatever. What would you advise News Channel 8 in that situation?
Deputy Chief, this is something that I think that comes up in some of the trainings, this sort of thing. Again, the first thing that the team is typically thinking about is kind of isolating it and keeping it between the hostage taker and the police. Anything like that.
That would
you
have
guys
to be,
would have to.
If the police are there, I guess is the question. If we're not there, then the news organization is going to need to make that decision. I would like to think the
Well, that's sort of the question. So what if they call you and say, what's your advice to us?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to have to be a collaboration between police and news media. There may be an opportunity where that could be helpful to the situation. Most times not. Negotiations, as Jonathan knows, is there's a lot of psychology behind it. And you have to understand why they're making that demand and what are they going to do. Because I'll give you the example. The reason they may be asking, and this is completely hypothetical, the reason they may be asking is because once you put them on camera, now they're famous and they're going to kill. And so are we going to speed up the process by putting them on camera? That's just a very simplistic example of why that may not be a good idea. There may be other instances where it is a good idea because the hostage taker wants to get their message out and then the incident would be resolved. So those are two extremes on when that could be helpful or harmful to the situation. And it's not an easily answered question because no two situations are alike. They're very dynamic. No two people are alike. They have different motivations. And so, is somebody taking a hostage for, money, fame, trying to get their message out, or are they taking hostages because their intent all along is going to be to kill? And now they just want to make a public spectacle of it. So it's a great question, and this is where I think, to Bruce's point, this is why the relationship between media and law enforcement, why not always the best. I think here in Alexandria we have a very good relationship with our media, and this is why there needs to be collaboration. I don't want to say coordination because, as we all know, a free press is needed in our republic or our democracy. But the collaboration between media and law enforcement can be very important in bringing something, a critical event, to resolution. So we work very closely with our media partners, but in this instance, for this specific example, the only thing I can say is we'd have to assess it and coordinate that.
Michael, the press can become, and the coverage can be sort of strategically important to the terrorist or the person doing harm. In other words, that might be part of their goal, may not be. But the coverage can become part of the story as it's unfolding. And how does the press room approach that? How do they know when they're being used in that fashion, or what would their response be?
Well, you used the word hyper-vigilant earlier. People in the news business are hyper-vigilant against being used by anybody, right? Elected officials, the police. The last thing we want is, for our media organization to be used for somebody else's purposes, and that includes criminals, right? So, I think as you were asking that question, what was flashing through my mind is that the WDBJ shooting that happened last year in Virginia, where the embittered former reporter shot the reporter on live television with the express intent of, this is exactly what you were saying, with the express intent of sort of having that act of violence be broadcast. So that is a that is at the top of the mind of any media organization is being used by criminals for their purposes.
Is there any, well, I mean, so as the events unfold, we have the police and the press sort of doing this dance between giving out information, getting information, releasing information, not releasing information. Is the end result just simply going to be what it happens to be in that particular city and that particular incident? I mean, we who are watching the coverage can sense that at times, that dance is going on. The sheriff who won't give out information about the name, insisting that it'll glorify the victim, might be sort of a case over here, in my mind at least, of going too far withholding information that really is relevant in some way or fashion. Not that we have to say his name every minute of every hour of coverage, and it could be moderated back by the press and how they handle that. But sometimes, I don't know, it just seems like there might be more rules of the game that might be established that can make sense in these situations than we now have. Both of you can comment, or Jonathan, jump in on that.
So there's a couple things you went through there that I'm hoping I'm going to remember all of them. On the issue with the sheriff, he wouldn't say the name. He wouldn't confirm the name of the individual.
Wouldn't
so that
confirm,
was sort
right.
of an extreme example, right? So it's one thing to repeat the person's name over and over again and sort of bring them in a level of notoriety that they may have wanted, which is being used, right? So that's something media organizations are work very strongly against. The other thing that I was going to say, in reference to what you're saying, is this relationship with the police, right? So of the media people that I was talking to today, they were talking about the relationship between the press and the media. They said, the police and the media, they said, we're not your friends, but we're also not your enemies, right? So that's actually a really important distinction, that we don't work against each other, but we also don't do each other's bidding. And, it's not always easy to get information out of police officers, but they're distracted because they have other things to be doing, right? Fortunately for Alexandria, the city police department has an extremely well-staffed communications office. You can take the back and tell them I said that. They're not only answer the phone when you call. This is the most important thing, actually, for journalists. In my mind, I put people in two categories. Either you answer the phone when I call, or you don't answer the phone when I call, right? That's really important. So they answer the phone. That's great. And then they don't always answer the question, but they're very nice about it. And they also have a sense of humor at the Alexandria Police Department, which is nice. Sorely lacking in other police departments. So the relationship between the media and the police department is complicated, at times strained, but also really important, because they're not just dealing with us, they're dealing with the public at large, right? So they have an interest in informing the public, so they sort of go through us. Traditionally, that's the traditional model. Today, of course, there are all ways the police department can speak directly to the public that they didn't used to have.
So imagine, hypothetically, you wake up tomorrow morning and that reporter who's supposed to cover these incidents is in the hospital, and they call you and they say, Michael, go out, there's somebody's taken over the Navy Yard shooting, and cover it. How are you going to get your information? And we've talked about law enforcement, but what other sorts of sources do you get, and how do you rely on them? What's eyewitnesses, social media, experts from each other, from other reporters?
All of that is the
All of
answer.
that.
So one of the things that, this is just my own personal way that I would approach that. One of the things that has really taken off in recent years, and I'm sure everyone's sort of sick about hearing about, is social media and the rise of social media and how important it has become in our day-to-day lives. There is a great app that you can get on your iPhone, and I guess you can probably get it on other smartphones, called Banjo. You guys use Banjo?
I'm not familiar.
Okay, so it's like Geophedia. I don't know if you ever deal with Geophedia, but so I was at a journalism conference a couple years ago where they talked about this, and basically it uses geolocating information on social media platforms. Like, so if you're on Twitter and you put a tweet, you can you actually have to choose to do this, whether or not you're going to geolocate that tweet. So if right now I could go on Twitter and put a Twitter message, and I could geolocate it at this exact spot where I'm at right now. And you can also do this with Instagram. You can do this with Facebook. And so there's this app called Banjo. There's a much more high intensity you have to pay for. It's called Geophidia. So you can look at a map and see sort of pinpoints of where social media posts have been geolocated, right? So when I was at this conference, and Geophidia was there, and they gave us all free accounts. They expired, unfortunately, but they were really cool. And so you could go on Geophidia and look at a map. And so when the conference ended, I went to this high school football game in Florida. It was in Sarasota, Florida. And it was so intense that you could actually look at this map and see the social media posts that were on my side of the football field. And then you could see the posts that were done on the other side of the football field. And so you could see sort of where the people were in the stands that were doing the social media posts. It was really, really very interesting. Banjo is sort of the free poor man's version of that, which is what I use now. But so the reason I bring this up is because I use this in all kinds of contexts. If you're at a concert, a public event, if you're at a political rally, if you're at a convention, you can go on to this app called Banjo or Geophidia and sort of see what people are putting up and where they are when they're putting up. And then you can contact them as well. Of course, if you're on Twitter, you can sort of tweet them. So the reason I bring all this up is so like the Navy Yard shooting. So if I was sort of parachuted into the Navy Yard shooting, I would want to see what people were putting on social media, not because I would report it. This is a really important distinction here. It's not like I would go on there to say, X person is saying so-and-so. I wouldn't report that. I would then get in touch with that person and say, oh, you're an eyewitness. What have you seen? So it's a tool to learn things. There was another thing I was going to bring up that's not slipping my mind. So parachuting into a place, what tools would you use? There's good old-fashioned gumshoe is really the best approach. I mean, sort of actually being in a place, seeing people, talking to them.
Are you on your own, or do you get some direction in your earpiece?
Other reporters. That you
You're a
brought that
reporter.
up. This is the sort of
No, but
dirty
not-
little secret among being reporters is we share information with each other.
Right. So you have other reporters, but do you get any earpiece information from your newsroom? Go over here, go over there. Are they in any command and control over their reporters during an incident?
That's not my experience. No, they just want incoming.
No outgoing.
No.
Okay. All right. Jonathan, so you're watching this coverage unfold on the towers coming down, or the hostage taking in the middle, and it's going on for 4 or 5 hours or something like that. Should we just turn it off at some point? I mean, or about get the kids away, or how do we process these events when they're happening?
Sure. I think, again, moderation is wise. I would, again, use the idea of, do you have enough information about what's going on? And when you have all the information that there is, maybe check back later and see, if something else has come up. There's not a lot of value other than frightening yourself and other people by watching it over and over. Certainly with kids or younger people, I think that's really something to consider. They may not need to, depending on their age, they may not need to see everything in detail, but certainly may need some, age-appropriate explanation about what's happening, or at the very least some reassurance that everything, that they're safe, or something like that. I think that would be a recommendation for that sort of thing.
Let's move to after the event here, and stay with Jonathan and ask about the PTSD symptoms. When do you know as an individual that it's time to get some psychological help because these things that have happened are just overwhelmed you in some fashion?
Sure. This is, PTSD is a particular disorder that can arise when people have experienced severe trauma. But there's other reactions to trauma, more normalized kind of reactions that everyone would have after an event. Certainly, everyone in this room, there was some trauma associated with something like September 11th, and that kind of thing is there will be some normal reactions to that. Sometimes things like hypervigilance, which was mentioned, but hypervigilance in a way where when we hear a siren, we're immediately, looking around and worried that something else has happened. Probably those are things that people can associate with their experience after 9/11. Hearing a loud noise and being startled, an exaggerated startle, something like that. This would be something that might be normal for a while after experiencing a trauma. But at some point, very individualized, but should sort of taper off and not be so frightening as if it's fresh every time. After some period of time, you should notice some change. And if not, that's when you might become concerned, or if you feel like it's going on too far, or if you're finding or getting feedback from people who care about you that it seems to be a little too much, it's affecting your work and relationships, that's when you know there's a problem.
Is there such a thing as community trauma? Entire town, city needs to work together to come out of something
Yeah.
after the event happens there?
Yeah, again, I think maybe that's what I was referring to after something like 9/11 or maybe even localized events. Certainly there would be, the whole community is going to experience this.
The Boston Strong motto was
Yeah.
sort of an attempt for a community to decide how they wanted to react to this. Was that something that was healthy in your mind?
I think so. I think that those kinds of things are very healthy, getting kind of everybody feeling more empowered and more that they're in control, that other people aren't going to be able to, take away their happiness and things like that.
Chief Huckler, law enforcement personnel see some pretty terrible things in these events. How do you handle the after-event stress with your people?
Well, it can be very difficult because our staff do see a number of, just in day-to-day work, they see a number of terrible things. But we have some things in place. We have critical stress management internally, so we'll use, it's essentially peer counseling. So if an officer's having difficulty with what they've seen or a critical incident, we'll pull a group together and have them discuss it and talk their way through it and share the experience. And I think that's been very helpful on a number of different incidents. The city participates in EAP. EAP is a
Means
Employee assistance program.
thank you.
Employee assistance
Yeah,
program.
the Employee Assistance Program, which is available to any city employee, and allows them to take a step forward in receiving counseling that's provided. They can get assessed, and then they can go on from there. A lot of what police see and what they do is through just shared experiences. You get to a point in your career where you see so many terrible things. Humor is a big part of getting through trauma. So that's an important part of those relationships that officers form, not only with their colleagues, but the community. We're very fortunate here in Alexandria. We got a great support system throughout the community. And so I think sometimes that's very helpful when officers feel that support and the trust that you give them. That's helpful for them to get through different types of trauma.
Bruce,
Michael?
can I ask a follow-up question, which is, I'm wondering, just as you walk through, we've got the counseling, we've got this program, I'm just sort of wondering, is there like stigma associated with going to a counselor or being part of a program? I'm just wondering about like the mindset of, I'm in the police department, I should be able to take it. Is there sort of resistance to participating in those kinds of programs?
Absolutely. I think probably in any profession, To your point, there probably is in law enforcement a stigma attached to seeking counseling. You know, you're not strong enough to do this job, and those type of perceptions. But I think through the years, those barriers are coming down. The services available have changed through the years. So when I talk about EAP, that's a confidential service. Supervisor won't. There's even some mandated times we will send people to counseling, and if we use EAP as part of that process, the department or the supervisors, we never know what the counseling is about. We just know they went. So we do have the opportunity to mandate certain types of counseling, and then it's the employee's responsibility to pull that forward. But to your point, yes, and that's the difficulty in what we do, is to ensure people have that outlet. Some people will find it on their own through sports, exercise, life outside of police work. Internally, we try and do a lot of training with our people. We just brought in a gentleman by the name of Dr. Gil Martin, who talks about the stresses of police work and how to manage that stress. And this, hypervigilance is actually one of the trainings we provided our officers. And Dr. Gil Martin talks about, if you have a scale, this is where people normally operate. So you have these two lines, and here's where people operate. Police officers are operating up here in this hypervigilant state. And then when they get off of work, they hit this extreme low. And it's very difficult in our profession to get into this even keel of normalcy. And so we try and provide our officers through training some strategies to get to this level of normalcy. And so that's one aspect. And I'll bring up one more point, and Jonathan, you might be able to help me on this. We have officers that are assigned to computer forensics, internet crimes against children, and a lot of our discussion is around resiliency of staff that are dealing with some of the most horrific type of investigations you can imagine, the assault on children. And so through that, there is mandated counseling, and we're starting to put this program in place. The FBI already does it. We're piggyback off of them and trying to develop a program. Our officer that's assigned to the ICAC task force, that's Internet Crimes Against Children, it's mandated that that detective go through a counseling session with a licensed practitioner once a year to evaluate where they are. And this is our way to create resiliency within our staff to see where they are. And in fact, we were training one of our detectives for this type of investigation, computer forensics. And after about a year, this detective raised her hand and just said, "I can't do it. What I'm seeing is starting to impact me." And so we pulled the detective from that assignment. It's not a punitive transfer, and we moved them into another investigative section. And that detective is often and doing great. But we're very aware of when an officer speaks up especially, but we really try and observe our people to see if there's any changes in behavior. We have a great relationship with CSB, and we use their services at times to make sure our people are taken care of, because if our people aren't, they're not going to be able to take care of you. So there's a lot that goes into that type of stress reduction and strategies in the police department.
Michael, after an event like this, if it should happen again, what are the imperatives for the press in reporting the story after it happens? I'm not just asking about the replay of the video 10,000 times, but rather what angles would they be looking for afterwards?
In most contexts, it would be the human story, like, who are the victims, what were their stories. You may remember, in fact, I think this won a Pulitzer Prize, on 9/11, the faces of the, wasn't Faces of the Fallen. Anyway, there were like sort of many obituaries of all of the, more than, thousands of people that died, right? So that was telling the human story. There's also the perpetrator, and this is actually something that people in the media wrestle with. In fact, we sort of alluded to this earlier. There's this guy in Oregon it's the Umpqua Community College, the community college shooter. So, the sheriff in that case that we talked about didn't want to say the name of this individual. So would you then sort of do a deep dive on his life, his troubled childhood, things that might have caused him to do the things that he did? There would be people that argue that that's not helpful, that's giving the person the notoriety that he might have wanted. There are other people that would argue there's a societal benefit in sort of learning this person's troubled history, that we might learn from it, and there might be some value in that. This is a long way of answering your question, I know, but I think there are many different ways of looking at sort of how media might be helpful afterwards. And those are questions that are hotly debated, and I don't know that we really have good answers for them at this. I mean, even now, there's this big debate about the name of the shooter. I mean, that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's like during the event, the name of the shooter. Right. So then the next week is, do you do the deep dive and looking at court records about any things that he might have done, or let's say his parents also had a court record? I mean, you can really get into investigating someone's life and sort of the things that made them who they are. Does that have value? And I mean, I don't really know the answer to that. I mean, that's where I would seek the advice of people that I work for. Is this something you're interested in? No? Okay, then I won't do it. But I mean, just as a reader, as sort of a consumer of news, I would be sort of interested in those things, but those are things that are debated. So that's sort of the human story, from the point of view of the victim and the perpetrator. And then, of course, there are, like, why did stuff happen, right? I mean, a mass shooting is one example, but then 9/11 is another good example. I mean, I know that we keep coming back to that, but there's these 23 pages that were in the congressional report that were redacted. What did those 23 pages say? Did they say the Saudi government had some sort of relationship with the hijackers? Did they say that the high-ranking Saudi members of the Saudi society had some sort of relationship with the hijackers? Those 23 pages are still redacted. This goes back to an earlier point. Why are we withholding all this stuff? Is there really value to withholding this stuff, or should it be released? I think there's probably some societal good in releasing more of this information than withholding it.
Well, we do get into the conflict between the press wanting to do the investigative journalism on what happened, or why did it happen, or who made it happen, and the police trying to investigate this from a criminal prosecution point of view, and the interests aren't necessarily aligned in those two investigations. Is there, the police, when they finish up with one of these things, will do I don't know if you still call it this, but an after-action report. Mm-hmm. They'll take whatever happened and they'll set somebody aside and say, write up how we did, and try to look honestly at where we succeeded and where we failed and how we can improve it. The sort of things that led to Chief Lanier saying, give me the right order again, run, fight, hide?
Run, hide, fight.
Run, hide, fight. I'm sorry, I'm going to screw that up when it happens.
Well, if you fight first, maybe we don't have to come.
There you go.
No, I'm just kidding. Run, hide, fight.
Okay. So there's a press organization, there's a media, not the press as a single entity, but do organizations, the press, sometimes step back after some big news story like this and say, how did we do? And
almost never, really. I mean, so the last media organization I was with tried to institutionalize this, not necessarily big events, but sort of big stories that we invested a lot of time and effort and thought and resources into, that after it was done and over with, that we took a critical eye toward it, right, and said, well, we could have done this better, we could have done this worse, and these can be difficult sessions to sit in, by the way, but they can be very useful as well. Then you just get into the issue of, well, there's more news to report. So, like, if you're sitting down to do the after-action report of the last story, you're not focused on the next story. Mm-hmm. So those actually can be very difficult to institutionalize, and in fact, it wasn't institutionalized. But they're very helpful when they happen. So the answer to your question is, it can happen, but it's very rare.
Coping with this afterwards, we mentioned we don't want to glorify the villains of the piece. Is it helpful to focus attention on the heroes and the people who've made the sacrifices, whether they're victims or other people who who helped out during the incident to minimize things or gave a good tip or that sort of thing. Looking at the collective consciousness psyche of a community, is that useful? And would it be useful for the press to sort of tilt that way as opposed to reporting on the perpetrators?
Okay, Bruce, you're looking at me to
Yeah,
respond to the collective conscious. Okay, I think there's the value of pointing out heroes or things like that. There's something to that. To me, what I worry about is inviting kind of black and white thinking about heroes and villains and things like that. These things are very complicated. It may invite stigma and things that we don't, and prejudice, things that we don't want to see more of in our society. I think some of the things that focus kind of on healing and rebuilding community and resilience and things like this, that's a nice approach to take, in my view.
I'm going to ask to draw this to a close by giving the floor to each of these gentlemen to say anything they might want to in conclusion about maybe a personal episode that meant a lot to you, some event that happened or you participated in or that you covered. Is there, when you were invited to come and speak here, was there something in your individual consciousness you said, gosh, it just makes me think of? For me, it was 9/11, and as I told somebody beforehand, it was the airplanes flying overhead months and months afterwards. Every time they flew, it just reminded me of what had happened, and it sort of really bothered me that I couldn't hear that noise and not get the event out of my mind. And a few other things like trying to call your wife and find out if she's okay, or her trying to call you, and walking down the mall, walking home from Union Station and thinking, the mall, looking around here, this is a pretty target-rich environment. Sort of trying to get through real skinnily. But for you, personal experiences with something that stays with you.
I would also say 9/11. I mean, I think that's obviously sort of, for anyone that was alive in that time period, probably made an impact. I lived in Tallahassee at the time and worked for a daily newspaper in Tallahassee, and we put out a special edition of a newspaper, right? I mean, this is very rare. It hadn't actually happened since Pearl Harbor. I was actually thinking about this earlier today, and I thought, I don't have a copy of the special. Why didn't I save a copy of the special? It just wasn't, I wasn't thinking about saving stuff, I guess. But, and I remember I used to appear on this radio station in Tallahassee, and I remember driving the special edition over to the radio station as like something I could do. I mean, I sort of felt helpless in the face of all of this stuff. And, I worked on the editorial board. So, I mean, once we picked the cartoon and had the letters to the editor and we had our editorial, that didn't take long. So I felt like I had something to do. So I drove the special edition to the radio station, which in retrospect seems kind of stupid, right? But, I mean, it was something that I could do. And then also, I mean, just sort of psychologically, I remember when I got home and I'm just watching CNN, I'm no longer a news person, I'm just at home watching television. I saw it in a very different way, right? Because I was, at least when I was at the newspaper, I had something to do. And then I got home and I had nothing to do. And it was a lot more frightening then. So that's my sort of personal reflection on that.
Jonathan?
Yeah, as a therapist, I tend to look at individuals and think a lot about these events, not just big terrorism events or critical incidents, but that affect a lot of people. But the things that we all go through, and working as much as I have with the police department, the sheriff's office, and just in emergency mental health here in the city, the personal suffering that we see after any kind of trauma, whether it's a daily kind of thing we kind of take for granted, like a car accident, or some type of accident where somebody's hurt, or a child is injured or killed, or something like anything, and seeing how this affects people personally, how the events in the world can stimulate some of people's, other traumatic things that have happened to them, other things in the past, and really bring things back up that maybe hadn't, had been kind of worked out, or and we see this, and this is where people having an opportunity, like Deputy Chief said, critical incident stress response groups that we'll have after an incident, having an opportunity to talk about it, having an opportunity to get a little bit of education about what to look out for, having a conversation about what are you going to do. Are you going to, after you've witnessed a nasty car wreck and saw some bodies today on your responding to an accident scene, are you going to go home and talk to your family about it? Just kind of having these conversations with people, and I think about I guess what I'm saying is I think a lot about the personal side and how these kinds of traumas really are maybe more frequent than we imagine. We're sort of talking about big things that affect whole communities, but these things happen all the time.
So I think the thing that makes the biggest impact on me, whether it's 9/11 or a homicide investigation in the city, there's too many critical incidents that I've either participated in or have known about just from being a police officer, but they all have a common theme, and it's the impact on the community. If you go back and look at some of our high-profile cases, there's one common theme, and it's how it impacts the community. I remember a homicide over in the Park Fairfax area that I was part of. I participated in the investigation, and a woman was killed to domestic violence, and how it impacted that community. I remember the young boy Shiflett killed over in Delray, being part of that investigation, see how it impacted the community. Another boy that was killed down in Market Square during a fight, and how that impacted the community. And most recently, the Severance case, and the impact that had on the community for more than a decade. And so when I look back and I review parts of my career, the thing that's left the biggest impression upon me is the impact on community, because as police officers, we're always looking through a lens of our profession and our job. And at times it's quite different than how the community sees it. So it's always been an important part of, I know, the Alexandria Police Department, and certainly Chief Cook and myself and others who have been around, it's forums like this, and it's forums in the aftermath. You talked about what happens in the aftermath, is trying to have some connectivity to the community to let them know things will be okay, to let them know that their police department is going to do everything they can to bring the community back to normalcy. You give the example of 9/11. I just want to I'll finish with this experience on 9/11. We didn't know what was going to occur. We had prepared before 9/11. We knew terrorism was out there, but it had never come here. And at that time, I was part of a tactical team, and so they called us back to work, and we were deployed. And where do you deploy a tactical team when planes are going into buildings? They had shut down National Airport, but there were still few planes still up in the air. So I remember radio calls of, there's a plane coming in, and nobody knew what was going to happen next. But the thing I remember most, and it's just so ironic because it's such minutia, I remember being deployed to an area of the city where it was a shopping center, and we wanted to provide a level of presence and protection. And you asked about evacuations. Well, if you don't remember, it was gridlock. Most people were walking out of D.C. Route 1 was a parking lot. And I remember this gentleman coming up to me and just screaming expletives at me, asking me why I'm not directing traffic. So, it kind of and I had to laugh. The day was a terrible day, but I had to laugh. This guy was having a bad day, and I'm not sure what he knew about what was occurring during the day. But I always remember that little instance because it just gives a little insight into the community. Everybody has their lens that they look through. Everybody has what's important to them. But as a police department, we try and ensure that we listen and know what's important to you so that we can go about our job much better.
Thank you. When we put this together, we wanted to not scare the bejeebers out of everybody, but rather I think, at least speaking for myself, give you some way you can think about this calmly and rationally and prepare yourself and prepare your community to defeat the purpose for which the terrorists caused these things, or in other words, they want us to walk around in fear. They want us to feel disconnected. They want to destroy the sense of community we have. So prepare, go through the event with your eyes wide open, as calmly as you can. Watch yourself, watch your loved ones, keep them calm, keep everything under control. And then afterwards, watch for the signs of people who are having trouble dealing with it. Seek help. Ask others to seek help, and we'll do fine. And whoever has tried to do us harm will have not succeeded. So I'll give this back to Pam for her to close up.
Oh, I'm going to ask one other question. See something, say something. Who do we say it to? Is that a 911 call, or how do we know who to call?
Most times it's going to be the non-emergency number to our Department of Emergency Communications. If it's a crisis, critical incident, act of violence that's occurring right there, 911 is the number to call.
Okay. That non-emergency, do you have it on the tip of your tongue?
703-746-4444.
So everybody on TV knows that you know it, and we can put it on our website at some
Yes, ma'am.
point? Okay. Thank you guys very much. It was very informative. I appreciate it. Reminding everyone that there will be the next meeting, May 23rd. Is that right? Okay, thank you. And also remember that if you have questions that you want to ask Governor Gilmore, or if you have suggestions for future programs, if you didn't write them down tonight, you can do them on our website, which is agendaalexandria.org. So we'll see all of you and many of your friends on the 23rd. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Mike.